Have you noticed how quickly peace seems to disappear in our lives today? One harsh email from your boss, one careless remark from your spouse, one judgmental comment on Facebook. That's all it takes. And suddenly the calm you worked so hard to protect shatters into pieces. Your chest tightens, your jaw clenches, your mind replays the insult again and again. This is the reality so many Americans wake up to every day. We are a nation constantly on edge, stressed about bills, deadlines, divided politics, the endless pressure to be enough. We live in a world of noise where arguments break out faster than conversations, where we scroll through other people's anger and comparison every time we open our phones. Words have become weapons, thrown carelessly, and without realizing it, we pick them up and burn ourselves with them. But here is a truth that Buddhist wisdom has whispered for centuries. No one can take your peace unless you hand it to them. That's right. The power is not in their insult, not in their criticism, not in the chaos of the world around you. The power is in how you choose to meet those storms. Imagine being able to pause instead of react, to breathe instead of boil over, to see anger rise inside you and simply let it drift away like a cloud across the sky. That's not weakness. That's real strength. The kind of strength no boss, no critic, no politician, no stranger on the internet can shake. And that's exactly what we're going to explore together. 7 timeless lessons on letting go, drawn from Buddhist teachings, told through stories, metaphors, and simple practices you can bring into your life today. These are not abstract theories locked away in temples. They are living practices that can help you find clarity in the middle of your messy, modern American life. If you stay with me until the end, you won't just leave with knowledge. You'll walk away with practical tools to build an unshakable center inside yourself. A steady place of calm you can return to, no matter how loud the world gets. Because while storms may rage outside, your inner peace doesn't have to move. Number 1, the nature of anger in Buddhism, understanding the root cause. In Buddhism, anger is not seen as an inherent part of who we are, but rather as a temporary emotional state. It's something that arises in response to external circumstances, often driven by attachment and ignorance. The Buddha taught that these emotions are part of the 3 poisons, greed, hatred, and delusion, that bind us to suffering. Anger, in this sense, is a manifestation of hatred, which clouds our judgment and causes unnecessary turmoil in our minds. To understand this better, let's take an everyday example. Imagine you're holding onto a hot cup of coffee and it starts to burn your hand. The natural reaction is to let go of it, right? Now imagine you continue to hold onto it despite the pain. The longer you hold onto the cup, the more it hurts. Anger is much the same. It's a reaction to something external, but the longer you hold onto it, clinging to the emotion or replaying the event in your mind, the more it burns you. In Buddhism, we are taught to release this grip on our emotions, letting them come and go, much like how we would naturally drop a hot cup if it burned us. This is where mindfulness, known as sati, comes into play. It's the practice of being aware of our emotions in the present moment. When anger arises, mindfulness allows us to notice it right away and recognize it for what it is. A temporary reaction, not something that defines us. It's like watching clouds drift across a vast sky. The clouds might block the sun for a moment, but they eventually pass and the sky is clear again. Take a moment to think about a time when you were angry. Did it last forever, or did it eventually fade? More often than not, anger is something that arises quickly, peaks, and then fades if we don't keep feeding it. Buddhist teachings remind us that our suffering is not caused by external circumstances, but by our attachment to how we think things should be. When we hold onto these expectations, anger arises. But when we let go of the attachment to those expectations, the anger dissipates and peace returns. In mindfulness, we are not pushing away our emotions, but rather observing them with a sense of detachment. We realize that just like the sky remains unchanged despite the clouds, we are the same, unchanging at our core. The emotions that arise are just passing clouds in the mind. To put it another way, think of a tree standing in the wind. The tree bends and sways as the wind blows, but it doesn't break. If the tree were rigid, it might snap, but its flexibility allows it to withstand the storm. Anger can be like that wind. It's powerful in the moment, but if we can remain flexible and not rigid in our reactions, the anger won't overpower us. We can weather the storm with mindfulness and come back to our natural state of calm. Anger is rooted in attachment to outcomes, to expectations, to how we think things should be. When we practice mindfulness, we can observe these emotions without clinging to them. We don't have to act on them immediately. Just as the storm eventually passes, so too does our anger if we don't hold on to it. Number 2, the hidden emotion beneath anger. In Buddhist practice, we often learn that anger is a cover-up, a mask hiding deeper emotions like hurt, fear, or insecurity. Anger may feel like the most obvious emotion in the moment, but underneath that feeling often lies something more vulnerable. In fact, the Buddha taught that emotions like anger are rarely as straightforward as they seem. The real cause often lies deeper, hidden beneath the surface. Think of anger as a security guard. It steps in when we feel threatened, but often it's guarding something we don't want to face. For example, imagine that you've had a long, tiring day at work. Then someone makes a small, seemingly harmless comment that gets under your skin, and suddenly you snap. What's really going on? Is the comment the true cause of your anger, or is it just the final straw in a long day of built-up frustration and exhaustion? Now, let's relate this to a more personal experience. You've been with a partner for a long time, and one day they forget an important event or milestone. At first, your instinct is to get angry. But when you sit with it for a moment, you realize that what's really bothering you is hurt. The feeling that you're not valued, or that you don't matter to the person you care about. Anger is often a response to feeling ignored or unseen. Instead of acknowledging that deeper hurt, anger steps in to protect us from feeling vulnerable. This understanding is key in Buddhist teachings. Anger is the messenger, but it doesn't always represent the truth. The truth lies in the feeling behind the anger, the vulnerability that we don't always want to confront. By recognizing this deeper emotion, we can approach it with compassion instead of reacting with more anger. In Buddhism, we are encouraged to practice compassion, both for ourselves and for others. When we're able to step back and identify that our anger is masking something like hurt or fear, we shift from a reactive state to one of understanding. When we acknowledge that the cause of anger is often linked to feelings of inadequacy or fear, we can begin to approach those emotions with kindness rather than judgment. Think of the way we react to bad weather. Often, people complain about the rain, the heat, or the cold. But these reactions don't change the weather. They only reflect an expectation of what we want from the environment. The same is true with emotions. Anger is our mind's reaction to something it doesn't like. It's our way of demanding that things be different. But just like the weather, the world will not change based on our anger. Recognizing the true source of our anger and cultivating compassion for that vulnerability is a powerful step in overcoming it. Instead of feeding the anger, we can gently ask ourselves, what do I really need right now? Is it understanding, reassurance, or simply a moment of peace? By acknowledging the root of our anger, we can begin to heal and respond with wisdom rather than reacting impulsively. Number 3, the choice point: mindfulness and Buddhist freedom in action. In the Buddhist tradition, there's a profound teaching about the space between stimulus and response. This space is where our true freedom lies. When someone cuts us off in traffic, or when a friend says something hurtful, our first impulse may be to react with anger. But the key to emotional mastery in Buddhism is to realize that there is a brief moment, almost like a pause, before we act. This is the choice point, the moment where we can decide how we want to respond. Think of it like a pause in a song. Imagine listening to music, and in the middle of the song, the music stops for a brief second, giving you the chance to reflect. This pause doesn't interrupt the flow. It gives you the space to decide whether to keep dancing to the rhythm or change your pace altogether. This concept of the choice point is empowerment. It's realizing that, no matter what happens outside of us, we have the freedom to choose our response. In Buddhism, this idea is closely tied to right action and mindful awareness. It's not that we can control external events, but we can control how we meet those events, how we respond to the triggers, the challenges, and even the anger that arises within us. Let's take an everyday scenario. You're at work and a colleague sends you an email that's passive-aggressive. In the past, your first instinct might be to fire back a sharp response. But by practicing mindfulness, you create the space to stop and ask yourself, what response would I be proud of tomorrow? This moment of pause allows you to recenter yourself and respond not out of defensiveness or pride, but out of wisdom and clarity. Buddhism teaches that our responses are a reflection of our mind. When we react impulsively, whether it's with anger, frustration, or impatience, we let our habitual tendencies take control. However, when we pause, we access our higher self, the part of us that can respond with compassion, calm, and wisdom. Consider a calm lake. When a rock is thrown into the water, it creates ripples. But if the lake is still, the rock does not disturb the depth of the water. The ripples quickly fade. Similarly, our emotions, when met with mindfulness, can come and go without disturbing the deep, peaceful nature of our mind. When we are centered in this peaceful state, we can watch emotions like anger or irritation arise, but we are not overwhelmed by them. We simply let them be, allowing them to pass without reacting. This ability to pause and observe before reacting is the heart of Buddhist mindfulness practice. It's about creating space between trigger and response, a space where we are no longer controlled by external circumstances. When we become aware of this space, we are able to choose the most skillful response, one that doesn't contribute to the cycle of suffering. The choice point is where our true freedom lies. It's in that brief moment when we can choose how to respond. The more we practice mindfulness, the more naturally we can access this space, and the more peaceful our reactions become. The key is that we are not simply reacting out of habit or emotion. We are responding with conscious awareness. Over time, this practice of mindful pause helps to break the cycle of knee-jerk reactions, allowing us to respond with greater compassion and clarity. Number 4, the observer self watching your emotions like weather. One of the most profound practices in Buddhism is the ability to observe your emotions without becoming entangled in them. This practice is rooted in mindfulness and self-awareness, and it is often referred to as cultivating the observer self. The observer self is the part of you that can watch your thoughts and feelings arise without identifying with them or being controlled by them. Imagine standing outside during a storm. The wind blows fiercely and the rain pours down, but you are standing in a sheltered spot, observing the storm without being affected by it. You can see the chaos, but you remain untouched. This is what it's like when we practice the observer self. Emotions like anger, sadness, or fear may arise, but we don't need to become overwhelmed by them. Instead, we observe them with a sense of detachment. Buddhism teaches us that awareness is the key to overcoming emotional reactivity. When we are mindful, we can notice the rising of an emotion and choose to observe it without judgment. We understand that emotions are not good or bad. They are simply passing phenomena like clouds in the sky. Just as the sky remains unchanged by the passing clouds, our true nature remains unchanged by the passing emotions. Example: imagine you're sitting in a cafe and a stranger spills coffee on your favorite book. Your initial impulse might be to get angry. But instead of immediately reacting, you take a moment to observe your feelings. You notice that your heart rate is increasing and your breath is shortening. You recognize that anger is rising, but instead of identifying with the anger, you step back and observe it. You think, I am feeling anger right now, but I don't have to act on it. By becoming the observer, you remove yourself from the cycle of reaction and gain the freedom to choose how to respond. In this case, you may choose to respond calmly and with understanding, recognizing that the situation was an accident and that your peace is far more valuable than the fleeting discomfort of anger. In the Buddhist tradition, this practice is often called vipassana meditation or insight meditation. During meditation, we practice observing our thoughts and feelings as they arise and pass away without clinging to them. We learn to watch them as they arise in the mind, but not to identify with them. The more we practice this, the more natural it becomes to observe emotions without becoming caught up in them. Think of a large, calm lake. When a stone is thrown into it, ripples form and spread across the surface. However, the lake itself does not try to fight the ripples. It simply allows them to pass. The ripples eventually fade and the surface returns to stillness. In the same way, when we observe our emotions from the perspective of the observer self, they can arise and pass without disturbing our inner peace. The key to mastering your emotions is to observe them without becoming them. By practicing the observer self, we become aware of our feelings but do not let them control us. We are able to watch the emotions arise, see them for what they are, temporary and impermanent, and then let them go. In this way, we can live with greater clarity and peace. The observer self gives us the emotional freedom to experience all emotions without being overwhelmed by them. It allows us to act skillfully in every situation, rather than reacting impulsively. With practice, we learn to become less attached to our emotions, understanding that they are just passing states of mind, not reflections of our true self. Number 5. The reframe revolution difficult people as emotional trainers. In Buddhism, we are often encouraged to view life's challenges, including difficult people, through a lens of growth rather than obstacle. It's easy to become frustrated when someone behaves in a way that irritates or hurts us. Whether it's a coworker who constantly undermines you, a family member who refuses to listen, or even a stranger who cuts in line. These situations can stir up strong emotions, but Buddhism teaches us to approach these individuals not as problems, but as teachers, guides who are showing us where we still need to grow emotionally. In a sense, difficult people are like personal trainers for our emotional muscles. Think of a weightlifter who has to lift increasingly heavier weights in order to build strength. Just like a trainer challenges a person to push beyond their limits, difficult people challenge us to strengthen our emotional resilience. They teach us how to set boundaries, how to remain calm under pressure, and how to respond with compassion rather than react with anger or frustration. Example: imagine you're in a meeting at work, and a colleague is constantly interrupting you and dismissing your ideas. The old habit might be to feel anger rising in your chest. But what if, instead of reacting, you paused and thought? This is a chance to practice patience and calm under pressure. Instead of allowing the colleague's behavior to trigger you, you stay grounded. This doesn't mean you are passive or letting them walk all over you. It means you are consciously choosing to respond with clarity, setting a boundary where needed, but not letting the situation drag you into a place of negativity. Buddhism teaches that suffering and difficulties are not obstacles to be avoided, but opportunities for growth. Every difficult interaction is a chance to practice mindfulness, compassion, and emotional regulation. Think of a master martial artist. They don't train by facing easy opponents. They train by facing those who challenge them the most, pushing them to become stronger and more skilled. In the same way, difficult people push us to become emotionally stronger. By reframing the situation and viewing it through the lens of growth, we stop seeing ourselves as victims of difficult people and start seeing them as teachers, helping us to develop our emotional resilience. Instead of feeling angry or hurt by their behavior, we can ask ourselves, what can I learn from this interaction? This simple shift in perspective changes everything. It's no longer about the other person's actions. It's about how we choose to respond, what we learn, and how we grow from the experience. Every difficult person can be seen as an emotional trainer. They challenge us to practice compassion, patience, and self-awareness. By embracing these opportunities for growth, we become more emotionally resilient and better able to navigate life's challenges. Think about the way a bamboo tree grows. It faces fierce storms, bending with the wind but never breaking. It becomes stronger with each storm. Similarly, we become emotionally stronger by facing and responding to difficult situations with mindfulness and compassion. We do not avoid the storm, we bend with it, learning from it. The next time you encounter a difficult person, ask yourself, what emotional strength is this person helping me develop? Instead of reacting immediately, take a step back and observe. Use this moment as an opportunity to practice emotional mastery. The more you do this, the more you will find yourself responding with grace and clarity, rather than being swept up in negative emotions. Number 6, the boundary blueprint, protecting your peace without walls. In Buddhism, the practice of setting boundaries is essential for maintaining our peace and emotional well-being. But setting boundaries in a mindful way is not about building walls or shutting people out. It's about protecting your inner world without becoming defensive or isolated. Boundaries are like the gates to a garden. They allow the right energy in while keeping the harmful or draining influences out. Imagine a garden that you tend carefully. You allow sunlight and water to nourish the plants, but you also make sure to keep weeds and pests at bay. Similarly, When we set emotional boundaries, we are making a conscious effort to nurture ourselves and keep out negativity that might drain our energy or disturb our peace. Think about a time when someone was overwhelming you with their problems. They might constantly call to vent, leaving you feeling emotionally exhausted. In such situations, a healthy boundary would be to say, "I care about you, but I can only listen to this for a short time. Would you like to talk about solutions, or should we meet up for something more positive later?" This boundary is not about rejecting the person, but about preserving your emotional energy so that you can be more helpful and supportive in the long run. The Buddha taught that to achieve peace, we must first protect our minds from the external influences that cause distraction or suffering. Just as we protect a physical space, we must also protect our mental space. Setting healthy boundaries is part of that protection. It's about knowing when to say no and when to say yes, not from a place of fear, but from a place of love and self-care. Boundaries are not walls. They are protective measures that help us stay grounded and at peace. By setting clear boundaries, we are honoring ourselves, our time, and our energy, just as a gardener honors the health of their garden by choosing what to cultivate and what to remove. When we don't set boundaries, we risk becoming depleted. We let other people's drama, stress, and negativity affect us, pulling us away from our own peace. But when we set healthy boundaries, we ensure that we are strong enough to give to others without losing ourselves. This is the principle of right action in Buddhism. To act with mindfulness, to ensure that we are protecting our inner calm while still being compassionate and present with others. Think of a busy river. If there are no boundaries, the water will overflow and flood the banks, eroding the land around it. But when the river has banks, it flows naturally, providing nourishment without overwhelming the surrounding area. Similarly, boundaries help to contain our energy, allowing it to flow in healthy, productive ways without overextending us. Reflect on your relationships and the energy exchanges within them. Are there people who consistently drain you without giving back? Are there situations where you feel overwhelmed because you haven't set clear boundaries? Take a moment to identify where you can create space, whether it's by saying no, taking time for yourself, or communicating your needs more clearly. Conclusion: a path back to your true self. So here's the truth, my friends. Peace has never been something the world could give you or take away. It's been inside you all along, waiting for you to stop clutching at anger, waiting for you to release the stories that keep you trapped, waiting for you to remember who you really are. The storms will keep coming. People will still speak without thinking. Life will still throw its chaos at your feet. But the difference now is this: you no longer have to dance to that rhythm. You can stand steady like a mountain watching the clouds pass. You can breathe, observe, and let go. And in that letting go, you discover a freedom no insult, no rejection, no disappointment can touch. Carry this with you. The next time anger rises, pause, feel it, name it, watch it pass. Remember, you are the sky, not the storm. And if tonight's journey touched something in you, I invite you to keep walking this path with me. Share your reflections in the comments. I read them all, and your words may be the light someone else needs. If you haven't already, subscribe to Infinite Buddhist Teachings so together we can build a community rooted in stillness, wisdom, and compassion. Because the world doesn't need more noise. It needs more people like you, calm in the storm, steady in the chaos, free in the deepest sense of the word.